Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Pacemakers Club Cardiac Café, brought to you by the Pacemaker Club and Four Hearts worldwide. Our topic today is Jordan's journey, her first 6 months with a pacemaker, healing and adapting. Our speakers today are Jordan Harris, a pacemaker recipient, also sales chain executive at Molson Coors Beverage Company, and Dr. Verma, who is a cardiac electrophysiologist at Baptist Healthcare Heart and Vascular Institute. So I'm going to turn it over to our speakers and they're going to get started.
Well, good evening, and it's nice to meet everybody. And thank you for logging in and listening to our conversation about Jordan's journey. My name is Dr. Sumit Verma. I'm a cardiac electrophysiologist. So that's a cardiologist who trained and deals with pacemakers and cardiac arrhythmia issues. And I'm the director of cardiac electrophysiology at Baptist Hospital in Pensacola. And I've been doing this a fairly long time now, so over 20 years. And it's really great to see somebody like Jordan who has been living with a pacemaker and doing so well. So we're really excited to talk to her and hear about her experience.
I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Jordan Harris. I'm 29 years old. I'm a chain sales executive for Molson Coors Beverage Company, and I live in St. Pete, Florida. And I received my pacemaker in May of 2015 when I was 18 years old. And the reason I received my pacemaker is because when I was born, we didn't find it until I was 8 months old, but I was diagnosed with complete heart block at 8 months old. My mom had taken me to my pediatrician because I suffered from pretty chronic ear infections, earaches, stuff like that. I had tubes placed several times. So it was just kind of like a routine doctor's visit. And my pediatrician listened to my heart and immediately told my mom, something's very wrong. You need to take her to the hospital right now. So my mom immediately took me to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, and my dad obviously came and met up with her as well. And from that day is when I was diagnosed. So they do believe it was congenital, even though they didn't find it until that age. And of course, I don't remember a life before having this, but that's kind of the background of my story. And luckily, I was able to be healthy and pretty asymptomatic to not have a pacemaker for the first 18 years of my life. But of course, I was closely monitored by going to Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. So, yeah, I'm definitely familiar with all the cardiac things, pacemakers, echoes, EKGs. I've been doing it my whole life.
Well, that's great to hear. I am curious, as a child, what symptoms exactly did you notice? Did you find yourself compared to the other kids, maybe not running as fast or having other issues? Or I'm curious how it presented exactly.
Yeah, I can remember my parents always telling me that I love to sleep. I was one of those kids who never had to be persuaded to take a nap. I was always very enthusiastic anytime I got more sleep. So I would say definitely just being kind of lethargic my whole life. I always just remember waking up tired. In the afternoon, I was tired. And I always remember needing a ton of sleep. But I would say I definitely had a harder time keeping up, at least like the endurance part of running around and stuff like that. I would definitely have to give myself breaks in the meantime. But despite all of that, I think I was still pretty energetic as a kid, but I definitely kind of had those disadvantages pretty early on.
Sure. I think kids have a way of making up for some of the things like this. They probably have a little better reserve than adults do. And do you remember, did you pass out or have any of those issues, or tell us when that happened?
Yes. So I never really had issues passing out when I was young, just because from a very young age, from my parents and my cardiologist, I was always told if you feel like you can't keep up, you need to sit down, catch your breath, etc. So I never was able to like run the mile or do like the pacer test when I was like in elementary and middle school. I was always excused from that. So I was always very aware of that. But the reason I ended up getting my pacemaker when I was 18, and my cardiologist, Dr. Campbell, who was at CHOA, he always said it's never an if, it's a when. So he's like, there will be a point in your life that you probably will start passing out and it will probably get a little bit worse as you age. And it did. My freshman year of college, I was coming back from a class and I stopped into the bathroom and I passed out in the bathroom. Was the only fainting episode I'd ever had. And obviously it immediately concerned me. I called him the next day, kind of let him know. And at that point, that was the catalyst at that point to say, hey, I think it's time that you finally get your pacemaker. I think this is the right time frame.
I think your physicians were incredibly wise to let you grow to an age where you could get a pacemaker placed safely. It's more tricky to implant pacemakers in smaller children for all kinds of reasons. They outgrow the leads. The leads are in there much longer. They can fracture. And for them to watch you so carefully until the perfect moment, basically, and then give you a pacemaker, I think was extremely well thought out.
Yes, I'm very glad it went the way it did. Before that being explained to my parents, before, this was their first time hearing everything about pacemakers. And upon hearing that, they're like, well, why wouldn't we do this now if it can make her feel better? But like all the reasons you just explained, it can be a lot riskier, a little more difficult in children. So it worked out perfectly when I finally did get it.
Yeah, one of the things that comes to mind is maternal lupus. So as you know that, if the mom has lupus, there's a possibility that the child may develop congenital heart block. And tell us if there's any such family history, or were you ever diagnosed with some other condition that might have caused your complete heart block?
Yeah, that was something that my mom had heard a lot. And my mom did not have lupus, nor does she have that now. She was not on any medications when she was pregnant with me, nor does she have any other disabilities or genetic defects that we would have known that would have affected me. So it's quite a mystery. We have no idea how that happened to me. And there's nobody else that I know of on either side of my family that has any sort of heart issues. So it just kind of seemed random to
Sure.
us.
And do you have any siblings?
I do. I have a brother and a sister.
Okay. And I assume by now they've been told and tested and they don't have the heart block condition.
No, they do not.
Yeah.
They're married, have children of their own, and even their kids and stuff, they're all quite healthy.
That's great. So, do you want to talk about your pacemaker implant surgery and how it went?
Yeah, it seems like forever ago, but at the same time doesn't seem that long ago. So it was when I was 18. I think I fainted in about end of February, early March. And I had told my doctor, unless you really think I need it ASAP, I would like to wait until I'm done with the semester and done with finals because it was my freshman year. And he agreed that probably would have caused a lot of stress just trying to do that in the midst of the end of that year. So we waited until literally it was the day after, I think, my very last final in college. And because I was still 18, I actually was able to get my pacemaker implanted at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta still, even though I was considered an adult. Of course, typical surgery things that they didn't want me eating or drinking anything past midnight. They, of course, told me, with the leads and they're making an incision deeper in your muscle that, of course, I was going to be in a little bit of pain and not feeling great about uh, everything at first. My parents took me that morning. I don't remember exactly how long it took. They kept me overnight for about 24 hours to monitor me and had me hooked up to like a heart monitor, monitoring my blood pressure, oxygen rates, heart rate, all of those things. And it was as good as it could go for sure.
Must have been scary,
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah, it was. I did have a panic attack. I think they were supposed to give me some sort of like anxiety meds before. So I kind of was waiting on that and they didn't. So when they rolled me back, I had a panic attack and they called in the anesthesiologist to see if they could knock me out early. And they did. So that was probably the only like scary part of the day. But yeah, building up into knowing you're going to have this big surgery and not knowing what to expect was definitely difficult.
Absolutely.
Well, looks like you handled it really well. So, congrats.
Yeah. Luckily, I've had no really issues since then. Obviously, I see my cardiologist here in Florida now about once a year. And they check everything and I still do my quarterly transmissions on top of that, where they kind of read my data and my battery life. And it's been pretty smooth sailing since then, knock on wood.
I'm curious how they handled your post-operative recommendations and care. Walk us through that. So you were in the hospital one day, then you were discharged. I assume you were home for a few days to rest. How did all that go?
Yeah. So when I got home, they kind of told me, like, I don't even really want you walking around a ton. My family and I, we're big walkers because we've always had dogs. So we take kind of daily walks. That's always been a part of our routine. And they told me they didn't even really want me doing that. They wanted me to stay around the house and take it really easy. But the pain meds I was on were definitely pretty hefty and made me feel very lethargic. So honestly, once I would get up and eat and I would take my pain meds, I would be pretty sleepy within a couple hours. So then I would take 3 to 4 hour naps. I'd be up again. And then it was kind of the same thing for like a full week, but they did have me in an arm sling as well for about 2 weeks just to prevent, like raising your arm. And they're worried about messing with your stitches. I had to be careful for the first like week of just showering and getting water on my stitches and risk of infection, everything like that. But other than that, after that first week, I definitely was feeling pretty good after I started weaning off the medication.
That's great. I think for some of the other patients who might be listening, I do want to point out that your surgery, it sounds like they placed your device under the muscle. You mentioned that.
Yes.
And that is sometimes considered in younger patients, mostly because of the better cosmetic result it leads to. And your pacemaker, I'm sure, is not even visible on the surface. You might have that scar, of course, but
Yeah.
it's very likely that nobody could even tell you have a bump there, suggesting a pacemaker because it's submuscular. And for that reason, there's a need usually for pain medication afterwards, which is usually not the case in a pacemaker that is implanted above the muscle. So in the patients I treat, who are generally usually much older than you are, we tend to put the pacemaker in the fat layer or just above the muscle. And in those cases, the pain usually is way less. And, sometimes we just take some Tylenol or Motrin for a couple of days and that's all they need. So I just wanted to point that out.
Good point.
Yeah. And just getting into kind of the support from my family and friends and kind of what my mental state was like after that. Of course, my family has always been super supportive since, they've known about this my whole life as well. And I grew up in a family with a lot of medical background since we had a lot of nurses in the family. So I think they were a little more in tune to keeping my mom kind of calm when it would be kind of overwhelming seeing me hooked up to these things and being in hospitals and stuff when I was younger. But after the surgery, I had a few of my friends come visit me, as well as my siblings. My grandma came into town. So everybody was super great after the surgery and was definitely understanding that, I needed to take it easy and take it slow, but received a lot of flowers and cards. And, everybody just showed up for me in a lot of ways. And I'm very thankful for that. They provided me and my family meals for the first few weeks, dropping food off for me, offering me rides because I wasn't able to drive for about 2 weeks. In that time, I think it was hard. I was an 18-year-old girl. It was my first summer after college, so I was definitely a little antsy being at home as much as I was. But I also knew that was a good time for me to slow down and watch a lot of TV, sleep when I could, because your body and mind go through a lot when you go through something like this, and that was something that was very much needed. And as far as like present day, luckily everybody in my life, it's never a secret. I'm always very open to talk about that I have a pacemaker, and I kind of want to raise more awareness about that, because the thing I've heard most in my life is, you seem too young to have a pacemaker. Letting people know you could be any age and have one. Also, something I make sure to do is, even in my job, I let my teammates and my manager know, hey, on the off chance that there's ever a medical emergency, I always want somebody to know that I do have one. And people ask me questions and kind of try to learn more about like the how, the why, what it's like to have a pacemaker. And I actually really admire that people care enough to ask and learn, because it's not my identity, but it's definitely a huge part of me. And I think that's cool for me to talk about, because it's not common. And I'm super thankful to even have such a life-saving device that's got me this far in life and has given me so much.
It sounds like the pacemaker was good for your mental and emotional health. And,
It was, yeah.
maybe it did provide you some more confidence that, okay, I'm not going to pass out here. I'm going to be able to sit through this meeting without feeling tired or sleepy. It probably helped you in many physical and obviously mental ways also.
Yeah, absolutely. It really did. Leading up to that surgery, I didn't realize how much I was sleeping. I started sleeping upwards of like 14 to 15 hours in a day. And I remember my roommate being like, "You're sleeping a lot. That's really not normal." So had I not even passed out, I think that was another symptom
Mhm.
I just needed more and more sleep. And it was definitely affecting my anxiety. That was a pretty tough time already, being freshman year of college and everything like that. So I would say that was another thing that kind of affected me and pushed me towards that, is I shouldn't be feeling as low as I was.
How low did your heart rate get at that time? Do you remember?
I think the lowest as an adult, I want to say, was like 45. I know when I was a kid,
Mhm.
my aunt that was a nurse would take my pulse when I was sleeping, and I think she said it was like 42 or 43 when I was a kid. So it would get pretty low.
Yeah. It sounds like you managed it all very well.
Tried my best to, yeah. But yeah, when you don't know any difference, sometimes you're like, oh, this is the hand I've been dealt. Yeah, as far as limitations and things, I would say the only thing that comes to mind when I think of limitations is really just when I go to sporting events or like the airport and they say you're not supposed to go through a metal detector, things like that. Is the past like 10 years, I've had to get pulled to the side and a lot of TSA pat downs and stuff like that. I didn't really anticipate so much of that in my adult life, which is funny. But also, I think the other thing is just having to be a little more careful. I do work out and I do lift weights and stuff like that. And having to be really careful with anything upper body just because you don't want to, this area is kind of sensitive. So that's something I've always been aware of. But other than that, I feel like I can do pretty much anything anybody else can do. Yeah. Work and social life, I would say same thing. I feel like I'm a very normal 29-year-old. I like to go to the beach. I like to go have drinks with my friends. I love going to sporting events, spending time with my fiance, my family. Work-wise, I've never felt slowed down. I do travel quite a bit for work. I'm in the car a lot. I'm in planes a lot. So still been able to live a very fulfilling career. Body image-wise, I think what was tough for me going into the surgery, and part of it was, again, I was 18 and a young woman. And my biggest thing is I was very concerned about a pacemaker scar. I was like, you put that wherever you implant it, put it very far on the side. So like it's not super visible and tops and like try to make it as tiny as you can, which isn't always realistic, of course, but that was what I was most concerned about. And within the first 2 years, I honestly forget the scar is even there. Sometimes it's faded quite a bit, but truly, like I made it so much worse in my head than it actually is. And, if people do ask about it, I'm like, oh yeah, I like forget it's there sometimes. So that's been maybe the worst thing body image wise, but overall, just maintaining my health and kind of current medical care. I take pretty good care of myself. I'm in the gym about 4 to 5 days a week. I grew up always doing a sport. I always grew up athletics. I felt I've just kind of kept that in my routine. I'm pretty good about what I eat. I kind of just try to stick to at least whole foods during the week and eat a lot of protein, fruits, vegetables, healthy carbs, etc. I definitely prioritize my sleep. I try to at least get, minimum 7 to 8 hours a night. And medical care wise, like I spoke on earlier, obviously I see my cardiologist about once a year and I do those transmissions. And luckily they haven't had too many suggestions for me other than, keep doing what you're doing and just let us know if you have any other symptoms or if you go on any other medications, stuff like that.
That's great. Looks like you're doing a tremendous job taking care of yourself and making the most of this. And you've adapted exceptionally well to the condition you have. So we had talked a little bit about the exercises, lifting weights, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I think that's important to discuss a little further about the lifting weights, repetitive arm motion, and the possibility of the leads fracturing. So you're young. We expect these leads to be with you your whole life, and leads can last a very, very long time. We have patients who've had leads for maybe 30 plus years, 40 years. I mean, your leads should last forever, hopefully. But there's a possibility of the leads over time fracturing, having to be removed, and stuff like that. It seems like you're being very careful and doing things in moderation, but there are some patients who may not be as careful as you are. So I think that's worth mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing worth mentioning is that there are newer pacemakers nowadays that are leadless. So they don't have the traditional leads. And it may be debatable. Some people may argue they don't have the same functionality as a transvenous pacemaker, the one with the leads. And there's some other issues, implanting them, removing them, etc. But there are several options for patients nowadays. Even within the kind of pacemaker you have, there's single chamber pacemakers, there's dual chamber pacemakers, there's 3-chamber pacemakers. And then there's variations in how we implant them. There's something called conduction system pacing. There's many, many variations, and it's tried to be individualized to the patient's needs. But seems like you have a really good result, good cosmetic result, as well as a electrical result, meaning that your functional capacity is very good. You're exercising 4 times a week and all that stuff. So continue doing well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Looking back on my journey, I guess some things I wish I knew. One thing I did not know after my surgery, I did not know I would be getting an arm sling. So I found out like once I woke up and I was in a sling, and they're like, by the way, you have to keep that on 2 weeks, which is fine. That was probably one thing I wish I knew. Same with like driving. They didn't want me driving because they didn't want me risking like if something were to happen. And again, you have to lift your arm. So those were some things I just didn't really anticipate going to surgery. But advice for others, I would say, it is scary to think about getting something like this implanted. And I think anytime you have to get like a life-changing surgery, that's a lot to think about. And you think about the what ifs and how it's going to affect you. But I would say my advice for others is really try not to think about the bad what ifs. This was by far the best thing to ever happen to me. I didn't even realize until I had my pacemaker how crappy I felt my entire life because I was just so lethargic and could never keep up with everybody else. And I feel completely just as normal as anybody else. And this doesn't have to affect you that way where you think like, I'm going to stand out so much in comparison to other people. It's not the case. And things I think people should prioritize is just their overall health. We're kind of already at a disadvantage sometimes having to rely on a pacemaker. However, there are things in your control with, exercising if you can, eating right if you can, and really just prioritizing, it's your body for the rest of your life, and how you take care of it really defines that. And that's not just physically, mentally too. We put a lot of stress on ourselves in life, and it's nice to have a reminder like you need your friends and your family and free time and, doing all the things that make you happy. And it's been pretty cool for me because already since I've had my pacemaker, I have a dual chamber pacemaker. Already hearing about, I think like some of these pacemakers have become smaller and even leadless. I think, doctor, you could probably speak to that better than I can, but just of what I've heard, I'm like, oh, I can't believe that didn't exist 10 years ago, or that it's already advanced this much since then.
That's great. You also bring up a great point about expectations that patients have when they're about to undergo surgery. And, as physicians or team members, we're not always, maybe we take things for granted. We just assume that, okay, you're going to wear a sling for 2 weeks. And that may not be even a thing that I would mention to the patient. And there may be a long list of things that we should mention that, you can't drive for 2 weeks, or you can't get in the pool for some time, or little stuff, you can't walk your dog. And those are the things we may not always bring up for discussion. We're more focused on the actual surgery. I hope you don't get an infection. I hope you don't get a lead dislodgement or some other pneumothorax and things like that. And we're probably more focused on that part. But you bring up a good point. It is worthwhile having a more comprehensive list of things, of expectations.
And of course, an arm sling in the scheme of things isn't the biggest deal. It was just stuff where I was like, oh, I just had no idea. I've never been in a sling in my life. So, not the worst thing, but just something I had no idea about.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. And Dr. Verma, we want you focusing on those really important things.
Yeah. Infection matters the most, I can tell you.
Exactly.
This is a good one because I feel like I've heard a lot of them. I think the most popular misconceptions about pacemakers, you've probably heard this too, Dr. Verma, but standing in front of microwaves with a pacemaker.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten that from people like, can't you not stand in front of microwaves? I had a friend ask me if I was allowed to use hair dryers with my pacemaker. I'd never heard that one. I just thought that was kind of comical. And then another misconception, kind of what I spoke on earlier, is, I've had like TSA people and stuff be like, are you sure you have a pacemaker? Like, I just don't think they give pacemakers to people that young. I went through the surgery. They definitely do. It exists for sure.
Well, that's great. The microwave question has never gone away ever since pacemakers were invented, and I don't think it ever will. But I think it's worthwhile answering that question to the patient because it brings up the issue of device and electronic interference. So I think that's patients should be aware of that. And like you said, the TSA avoidance of the going through metal detectors and stuff like that, not having the wand waved at your pacemaker, that's important for you to know and other patients. And avoiding placing your phone within 6 inches of your pacemaker or resting it on your pacemaker. Things like that, or getting into a swimming pool, for example, that isn't grounded. And we see patients come back and they record little noise or electrical noise on their pacemaker. And then we have to go back and ask them, like, where were you that day? Were you in a pool, or were you using some kind of chainsaw, some electrical gadget that might have caused this? And they'll frequently think back and say, oh yeah, you know what, I was doing that. And then that's worth knowing, because their interference is real, and it can cause your pacemaker to pause, because the pacemaker might think that there's electrical activity coming from your heart. It doesn't need to or send an impulse, whereas that electrical activity is external interference. So those things are worthwhile knowing.
Yeah. Another misconception that I just thought of is I think a lot of people think that you can feel it all the time. I think the first 24 hours after surgery, I remember it feeling kind of fluttery, and it just felt odd, which they said was normal. But other than that, it's not something, you feel. I think people think like you can feel it shock you all the time, and that's definitely not the case.
Yeah. And that's how the batteries last so long, because the pacemaker has to depolarize just a very small amount of heart muscle, and the heart does the rest. So it takes that very small electrical signal, and the heart does transmit its own electrical signal to the rest of the cells. And that's why these pacemaker batteries can last 10 or 12 years. Otherwise, it would be impossible. You'd run out of pacemaker battery in a year.
I want to thank you both very much, Jordan and Dr. Verma, for being here today and for this conversation. It's been very helpful and informative. So I want to see if there's anything else either one of you have to say before we wrap it up for today.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say is I'll just kind of share the overall reason I wanted to share my story with you guys today. And a lot of it is because growing up, having the condition that I had and getting a pacemaker while I was still in my teens, I didn't really have anything I felt like that I could look at as an example, or I didn't feel like there was a community that really represented that, because anybody that ever met with a pacemaker was always usually in the older demographic. But for me, I think this is really important for any young women, men out there. If you have a pacemaker, I want to be a good example of, I have one and I live such a great life and I'm healthy and I'm happy. And I want to inspire hope for the same. It doesn't matter your age. This device has saved my life in more ways than one. And, you have a bright future ahead, and you're in good hands with the right cardiologist and having this device.
Thank you.
Well, that's great. I will add that you are a great example for patients who have pacemakers and how well you've done, and especially inspirational for the younger patients who might be scared and might say, okay, is this going to be the end of me, or, am I going to thrive? And it's clearly you're a great example of how somebody can live through this and thrive. So congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank
Absolutely.
you. And thank you to cardiologists like you who do the work that you do to give people like us, fulfilling lives and great outcomes. And, I'm super thankful to have the team of cardiologists that I have growing up, and appreciative for you being on here too.
Thank you.
Very good. Yeah. Thank you both very much. Appreciate it. And thank you for all who tuned in. And we will see you on the next Cardiac Cafe.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.